If ATC is going to suggest that newness and evolving expression is missing from a lot of modern music, I imagine that I need to be encapsulating those things in the projects that are being created for ATC. So we're going to dive in to the first track from chapter 1 of We Are Connected. I would like to show you how I'm imagining these things are happening in the tracks from We Are Connected. I'm not going to play the full track. If you're interested in hearing that, you can hop on over to artTracksChronicle.com and check out the full track as is. I'm just going to go into right away breaking down the elements of the track. First, let's look at some instrumentation. The main beat that's being kept is being provided by the DFAM. That sounds like this. And that's it. That's really the only percussive element that you get in terms of thinking of actual percussive instruments, even though it's coming from a synth. Now, having said that, a lot of the other instruments are incredibly percussive instruments, and the way they're being played are also percussive. Acoustic guitar coming out of that speaker. We have a second guitar that's doubling it in octaves. So we have a rhythmic pattern and a melodic pattern that is also rhythmic just by nature of the quality of the sound. Then we have two different synths on either side. I believe that was done with the MS-20. So already we have lots of layers of rhythm happening. And then we obviously, the track is about Alicia in this case, who is an amazing cellist, and that's written into the story. So all of Alicia's tracks use the cello to help tell that story. Let me play once for you just the cellos that are doing the rhythm. A lot of these tracks for We Are Connected use strings as a primary idea. So in this case, there's a total of, I believe, 8 cello parts happening, and only 2 synths, 2 layers of acoustic guitar, and percussion. So it's mainly the cello sound that is actually there. All right, let's dive into the melodies that are happening. So the melodies are reserved mostly for the cello, though not always. So I'm going to let you listen here to the opening as the cello sneaks in so you can hear the melody popping out of the texture. Now let me mute, or rather solo out those 2 solo cellos so you can hear just that. So as you can hear, they're not doubling each other. They're not just harmonizing each other. They're actual different lines of music. This is one of the things I'm trying to do in finding this new language for me as a composer and creator is I want to combine, first off, a lot of what someone might consider rock or EDM instruments even with strings, but where the strings are providing the majority of the actual content, not being used as filler or as holding a chord for a different sound that you could get with a synth pad just as easily, but with really a different sound. The other element that you're going to hear throughout many of the tracks as the story continues is trying to combine this idea of Renaissance counterpoint, lines that are moving in and out, that move rather than this way, like a chord progression, move this way, like lines. And so this is the first hint of that with these opening cello lines. The next melody that comes in is actually not cello at all. I'm just going to play you the track where it starts, and you can hear for yourself who has the main melody. Bass solo. And this is, of course, a little bit programmatic to hint at the idea of these low resonant hums that get talked about a lot in the first chapter and the second and third. But it's also, in terms of the composition or the newness or a different expression, is that you have all these textures that are familiar, rhythm, percussive elements, synths, guitars, but the main feature is the low end, which means when it's not sounding out the melody, there's a lot of open space of just a lot of treble and percussion, something that you don't typically hear in modern pop music or a lot of even rock music, but you do hear a lot in classical music. So here's another example of trying to bring in tropes, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all, but wonderful things that get used in classical music throughout the centuries, working them into this style of music. And for me, that helps the expression and finding this element of newness that is less about fusion and more about trying to create something that sounds new, but using similar ideas from the past. Then we get the first, what I would call real melody. I'll just play it for you within the track. Here's the cello melody that comes in. out now so you can hear what's going on. As you can hear, it's a double-tracked cello. That's just a simple melody that is stated there. It hasn't been used yet, hasn't been stated yet. It's been hinted at. And then we get a little transition of music that combines all of the elements we've talked about so far. Which builds up to the final statement of the melody that you just heard. It gets used again, but this time it gets harmonized. So you'll recall that earlier in the track I mentioned the cello's melodic line opens with the kind of contrapuntal thing. But in this case, it's being harmonized in perfect fourths. And this idea calls back to this contrapuntal Renaissance, actually would be pre-Renaissance feel of almost organum, where the melody's going and following a line with two notes that are different, but they're constantly following one another. And as you can hear, you're getting, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're getting 6 different cello parts, even though there's only the 2 lines, so we get this really specific sound. And that sounds, this is the culmination of the full track, so you can hear how that sounds with that same melody, but with the rest of the track in. And this juxtaposition between all the cellos and everything else is something I absolutely adore, and it has such a specific quality of expression. And that is, you have this constant rhythm. It almost feels like it's choking you in its consistency of how it's moving slightly forward, and how all these transients are there. And against that, you have this melody that feels almost timeless. You don't even know what it's being counted, and it doesn't even matter. This juxtaposition of feeling is another really, it's been used in a lot of classical music in different ways to great effect. This would be an example of trying to harness that concept, which is different than deriving the idea from that music, and it's different than just copying it. The concept of that is this juxtaposition, which can be done many different ways. When I compose my classical or modern classical, whatever you want to call it, I'm thinking about this a lot, all the time. How do we take concepts that have been used and then just redesign them to be used in what we're doing now, which to me is very different than stealing an idea, because music is based off a series of concepts. A chord is a concept. Verse, chorus, that's a concept. And so the newness of expression, the newness of form that I'm exploring with all these tracks derive from these ideas. Last thing, I know this has been a long video, a lot of these endings for these tracks, which I didn't expect, have an open end. I'll play you the end. So the open-endedness for me comes in 2 ways. One, a lot of these endings have ended up being polytonal, meaning we have a chord, C major chord, and maybe stacked against that is an F sharp major chord, something that really doesn't feel like it fits. And that's an effective strategy when you're writing any music, because it sets up tension and then you can resolve it, and that feels like, wow, what a release. But as you could hear, this doesn't resolve it. It ends on that tension of polytonality. And I think the reason that this has been happening is because it's a continual chronicle of releases. I want it to feel like it needs to go on. To get that resolution of the end of this track, you need to get it at the start of the next one. If you haven't, please check out artTracksChronicle.com. You're going to be supporting the artists that are making this, and you're going to be supporting ideas of finding alternative ways to continue letting expression move forward, and to continue to find ways for artists to remain in control of their music and step away from the over-commercialization of it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.